Should we move on to the topic?
Yeah, let's move on to the topic.
Okay. We have an article here that Steve found from Premier Guitar. We'll post a link to the article. And it's a long article. It addresses a bunch of stuff, though. Mostly the theme of the article is the cost of musical instruments.
Right.
With a focus on how spoiled rotten we are as guitarists.
Yeah.
And do you want to talk about it, Steve? Like,
sure.
What are your thoughts?
It's hard to think about this article because you see so many. So basically, what this article is comparing is what does it take to be a professional musician for in like the rock world,
right.
the guitar world, versus what does it take to be a professional musician in like the classically trained music world.
Sure.
So
like orchestra pits and people who are in, studios recording soundtracks and things like that.
Exactly.
On classical instruments, violins, cellos, double basses, contrabasses.
Exactly.
All that
these
sort of stuff.
Harps. Oh,
harps.
Man.
They really harp on the harps.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. They basically,
so to give you an example, can I?
Yeah, I'll hand it to you.
Pass it over here. So they price out a bunch of stuff, and they said, okay, so I'll read this part because this is semi pertinent. It says, still, let's do the math. For a bare minimum typical rig, a pro guitarist might need to be properly equipped for most gigs. And I look at this list, and these are all like, I think these are even maybe like. These are a mixture of prices.
Yeah. I thought that was a fair rig rundown, like the basics of what you need. You could swap certain things out, but you would really be within a few $100s.
And this is like a full rig rundown for someone who's in like a very versatile, like blues. When I say blues rock, I mean like just a generic pop rock type outfit. You could play a lot of stuff with this. So this is what's on here. Fender American Standard Stratocaster, $1,200. Gibson Les Paul Standard, $3,000. Martin D18, $2,200. Vox AC30, $1,000. Ibanez 2-Screamer, $100. Line 6 DL4, $250. So that's the total for all of this stuff. So that's 3 guitars, an amp, overdrive, and a delay is $7,750.
These are all retail prices. Like if you didn't buy used.
Yeah, these are basically retail prices. And he says we could add another guitar amp or an additional pedal or 2 or 5 and still be under the cost of the cheapest professional double bass.
Yeah.
So I mentioned this in the last podcast. We looked at that $50,000 bass.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
While it seems like that's like on the high end, and it is on the high end for double basses. It's not like on the, oh my gosh, this is so ridiculously overpriced.
Yeah.
And
it turns out that that's like a pretty common price for stuff in that world. Like there's let me see if I can find. There's a part in this article that talks about how this guy wrote a guide to buying classical instruments for people who perform. Here, I found it. Before you gasp and clutch your heart, consider this web post by violin luthier Kevin Lee, in which he explains what kind of violin you get in various price ranges. One post section is labeled $6,000 to $50,000, the beginning of professional instruments.
At the beginning.
That's the beginning of the price range for professional instruments in that world.
Yeah.
Like in parts of this article, it basically says that if you're going out to be trying to be in an orchestra or something like that, a lot of places won't take you if you haven't spent a minimum of $15,000 on your violin if you're a violinist.
Right. And so the reason that I have difficulty with this article is because I see like starter violins, the student violins and whatever on Craigslist all the time for like $75, $150, $200.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I do know that I've read things about cello players that will spend like $5,000 on a bow.
Yeah.
Like, just for the bow. Like, that's not even an I mean...
It's not... You can't even hunt with it.
I mean, obviously it's necessary to play it, but I wouldn't think of that as like a major investment. I was for a long time I was looking for like either a cello bow or a viola bow, because I wanted to do like the Sigur Rós, Jimmy Page thing, whatever. Play a bowed electric guitar,
right, super
like,
sustain,
or like bowed bass or something. And like I'm like, holy crap! Like I think like a basic viola bow. It's like $80. I'm like, I'm not going to pay $80 for something I'm going to use one every
as
like
a gimmick,
20 songs or whatever. But that's the starter bow in this world. And I mean, we get a little bit of a glimpse into this world, and I say very little, with like drums.
Sure.
Because
it's still not quite the same.
It's not as extreme, but consider like
drums are much more expensive to get started on than guitar.
Yeah, well, consider like if a single high end cymbal. If you were to buy like a single high end cymbal new, you're talking about like minimum $250, $300.
There's all the hardware.
And that's just one cymbal and
all the parts.
You can't even mount that cymbal. You just bought a cymbal. You don't have any hardware. Isaac Vining, who has written into us, who listens to the podcast, I know I don't know what he's playing now, but he was playing like a DW kit, and he had like I remember one time he posted a picture of one of his snares. I think he paid like $600 for the snare.
Wow!
And so like I said, this is the closest to that world of like non-guitar things that I've had exposure to, but it still pales in comparison to like
way different.
Like I think a beginner harp is like $5,000.
Yeah,
you know, like a professional harp. I don't.
This article throws some crazy numbers out there. I haven't done any homework to verify them or not, but it's like it basically says that if you're getting instruments in that world, the person who made it spent months working on just that one instrument, and that's why it costs so much. So there's one guy out there who's famous for making contrabasses or whatever, and he makes 5 a year, or 3 a year, or something like that, and he makes his living doing it, and he makes a good living. If
he sells all 3 of them, he makes a good living.
Well, he's probably back ordered because there's probably only so many people making them, and there's orchestras all over the world.
And really, to put this contextually, and I talked about this in the last episode too, like I was looking at vintage, and like actually I saw when I was doing research for that Paul Jackson bass. I was looking at like a guy who makes brand new, like it was like a 2009, so basically brand new double bass. And I think it was like 25 or 30 grand, something like that.
Yeah.
To put that in context, I mean,
that's still middle.
How many guitar manufacturers? I'm talking like custom shop stuff. Right. I know I've seen like I think some PRS like Paul Reed Smith. I don't know why I'm explaining what PRS stands for, but I've seen some like PRS custom stuff that's like custom shop, double, 10 top, custom 24, like all these different things, quilted, spalted, whatever, maple,
dipped in gold.
Only 50 made that were like $8,000.
Yeah,
like you haven't even
to produce a $30,000 electric or acoustic guitar. Like you've got to do something nuts. Like it's really got to grab people's attention.
Yeah.
Like
you got to be like, I'm building this guitar from the oak tree that fell in my backyard.
This guy that you're talking about is making just normal contrabasses, $30,000. That's just the normal, whatever. Like if you had a $30,000 electric guitar, it would be like the most nuts thing.
It'd be insane
that you've probably ever seen in your life. And it's true. I think I've been saying this to you for a few years now. It is nuts to me how cheap it is to be a guitarist right now.
Yeah.
Like you can people talk a lot of trash about different cheap stuff that's out there, like, oh, Mexican Strat, blah, 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 blah. The quality of the cheap stuff that's out there right now blows the high range stuff out of the water that there used to be.
Yeah.
Even a few decades ago. Like, you look at the student level, like the student model stuff from the 60s and the 50s, and it's garbage.
Oh, yeah.
Like, in its playability and in what you can do with it.
It's got its niche, but, I mean, it's definitely...
It's people like it now because it's got mojo and because it's got, some kind of different feel to it.
And if you ain't got Mojo Nixon, your store could use some fixing. It's true. And, I mean, this... So I think, being a symphony player is like it's like the highest of the high end, in that world. I don't know what other kind of professional, like, I don't know if I go to my in-laws' church for Christmas, they have like a pit orchestra there. I don't know if those people are necessarily what would qualify as a professional musician for this. Like,
these are people who play at the symphony.
Yeah, these are people who are like playing down at like San Diego Symphony or like Boston Harmonic, Philharmonic, Boston Pops, whatever, Boston Symphony. But to put that in context too, like we talked about Kurt Cobain earlier in this episode, and we kind of made like this DS1 joke. But the reality is there are a lot of guys, even like the big modern guys. If you want to look at rigs, go to guitargeek.com. They've got a ton of rigs. I love that site. I wish they would put out more bands that I'm into, but it's really neat to see some of the stuff they put on there. And you'll see like some of these classic records were cut with like
basic stuff,
really basic stuff where you go like, oh yeah, I can recreate Eddie Van Halen's rig from top to bottom for like $2,500, maybe at the most $2,500.
Sure.
You
just have to be willing to chop up an old Charvel or something like that.
And so I think in my mind, this kind of just raises this question about whether or not, and I personally, I think the answer is yes, that from top to bottom, like what we consider like great rock music or great popular music, and I'm including like really, things that, when I say pop, I mean things that aren't, you're not playing sheet music. It's pop. It's pop music.
4 chords. Verse, chorus, bridge, verse, chorus.
I'm including, all of your shred masters, like, your Vais and your Malmsteens and all these guys. All of these guys, like basically, that all of these forms of guitar music are predominantly like their folk music.
Oh, absolutely. I didn't know where you were going. Yeah, that's absolutely true.
And so because of that, because everybody and their mother is doing this, and because, I mean, you can learn guitar super fast to a level of like, of competency to at least play in front of people.
Yeah.
That I think that's one of the things that like drives the mass-produced market for this.
Yeah, I think that the mass production of guitars is definitely a contributing factor to the price points that we're seeing now, just because there's so many being made. And this is something that I think I've talked to you about before. If they stopped making guitars today, 100%, no more new guitars, I wonder how long it would be until, prices got driven up to where people like, we absolutely need new guitars.
Yeah.
Because like, I've got like 14 or 15 guitars.
Sure.
You've got a crap ton of guitars.
Yeah.
Most of the guitars we know have tons of guitars laying around. If suddenly, no one made guitars anymore, there'd still be a market of guitars where everyone's just swapping their stuff.
For sure.
There's not going to be a shortage of guitars. You can't, with that sort of saturation going on, you can't go high price.
Yeah.
It's never going to happen, especially with how great these things play now.
Yeah.
It's crazy how good a mid-level, and when I say mid-level, I'm talking like in the high 400s to like low $800 range, off the shelf retail price guitar can be. Like, That's good.
You know, something that's imported, probably like a Korean. Well, even now, like the some of the Chinese stuff that's coming out.
There's great stuff coming out of China.
Is are great instruments.
One of my main guitars is a Korean guitar, the Hamer.
The Hamer, right?
I say all the time, I preach to people about Hamers. Get import Hamers. They're cheap as dirt. You can pick them up for like $250. I think they outplay any upper mid-level Epiphone.
Oh yeah.
I think they're awesome.
I can see that for sure.
You know,
they're probably made by the same Koreans.
I think the necks are awesome.
The same factory.
I think if you don't like the pickups, swap the pickups. That's $100 to change pickups. Like, they're crazy great guitars for the money.
Yeah,
and they're super cheap on the used market. But it's like, going back to this article, you know, talking about how many guitars we all own. It says in there that, like, this a way different culture for people in that scene. Like, I have 14 guitars. Someone who's a violinist in a symphony, they probably own that one violin.
Do you have 14 guitars for real?
I think we counted that a couple episodes, or 14 instruments, including bass and ukulele and other things.
Casiotone?
And I don't count the Casiotone as a guitar.
Dude, do you have a djembe?
Yeah, that's my sister's.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
might have to borrow that.
But the people in these symphonies and orchestras, they'll have one instrument. They don't have a second backup instrument. And if they do, then it's probably just a beat around, you know, sort of thing. But they invest, you know, all their money into the greatest instrument that they can buy, basically. And it seems like it's part of the career, and it's part of what helps get you a job. And those people, some of them make good money, but none of them make great money.
Right.
I think the top end is like $100,000.
I have no idea.
Yeah, I think it says in the article. I think it ranges from like $30K to $100, which isn't bad money. But if you're making $30,000 a year and you're starting out, and you have to drop minimum $15,000 on an instrument, that's gotta hurt. That's rough. You really got to be. It's probably affluent people getting into this, right?
It just depends. I mean, there's a lot of people who, you know, they start at the bottom and you know, it's all just grinding. I think in the article they talk about people, you know, they basically take out auto loans, like the equivalent of an auto loan.
You insure stuff like that too.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You have a $50,000 instrument laying around, you insure that.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could sleep at night with an instrument that expensive sitting in my house.
Yeah.
I'd be terrified. I'd definitely buy a gun.
What?
I would stand the contrabass up in the corner, and I would sit by the door with a shotgun in my lap.
Oh gosh.
And just not sleep for the rest of my life.
What if like one time at like 4 a.m. you started having delusions and you shot your contrabass?
Oh my gosh. That would be the end.
Oh man.
It's like the beginning of like a Matlock episode or something like that. Like, oh, we found the symphony player in this room. It looks like suicide, but someone shot his contrabass too. It's some sort of like Law and Order episode, or, you know, swap out any lawyery show. Are you trying to sing the Matlock theme?
No, that's the Law and Order theme. I don't know the Matlock theme.
They just have that. Yeah, I guess that is the Law and Order theme. Oh my gosh, what is happening to us right now? Do we have anything else to say about this article?
You know, I just thought it was a really eye-opening article. That's why I wanted to talk about it.
I mean, we talk on a lot of groups, like I said before, and there's a lot of times things come up where someone will buy an expensive piece of equipment, whether it be, you know, a $3,000 guitar or $2,000 amp or a $400 pedal. And some people out there get butthurt over it and get, they have like jealousy rage. We're like, oh, how could you do that? Blah, blah, blah. This is what I have and it works for me. Why would anyone else need this? But this really puts it in perspective how just spoiled rotten we are as guitarists. How cheap it is now.
Yeah, everything.
The premium stuff is within financial reach of your average Joe who works.
Yeah, and by no means, I talked about taking out like car loan type loans that these professionals do. As a general rule, I would say don't open up a Guitar Center credit account to finance your Strat. Like,
be thankful that this stuff is cheap and
like just have 6 months of patience, putting $200 in the bank, and in 6 months be really happy for yourself.
I gotta say, like we've talked about this before, I don't own any electric guitar that I think I've paid over $250 for. I did have a chance to play a $4,000 guitar. A few weeks ago. One of my bandmates is like a local distributor, I guess is what you would call it, for Ronin guitars. You should look up Ronin guitars. They make a really awesome product. And he usually has one or two of these things floating around that he shows to people, and he does studio work and shows studio musicians and tries to sell these things. One of the guys, one of the top guys from Ronin, came to one of my band's shows a few weeks ago and brought one of the guitars with him, and I got to play around with it during our warm-up. If I was a professional musician, if I was making money playing guitar, I'd totally drop $4,000 on that guitar.
Oh, yeah?
It felt like $4,000.
Did it sound like $4,000?
It's hard to tell. Like, here's what I say about electric guitars. I've said this before, too. Like, it's all in the pickups and your amp and everything else. I could probably get that same sound from some of my other guitars just by tweaking the volume or tone knobs or by dropping different pickups.
But it wouldn't feel that good.
The feel of it, it felt like money, in my hands.
And to go way back to the beginning of the podcast, that's exactly why I'm saying I've gone back and forth. Like, well, I could sell this my American Jazz bass, and I could like buy like another Mexican one and pocket $400 and pay off a credit card 3 months sooner or whatever. But like the American Jazz basses I played, they feel like
You're really buying a
great
feeling.
Instruments.
When you're buying an electric guitar, you're buying, number one, how well it plays. Number two, kind of how it sounds, and then you're buying how it feels. I guess how it feels should be number two, because the sound is kind of subjective,
right?
But how it feels is a big deal for me. And then how it looks is at the bottom of the list, but still pretty important because you want to look sexy.
Yeah, and sometimes you just get hooked on a feeling.
Yeah. But it's, I'm talking about a $4,000 guitar, which I would never spend that much money on. And that's pennies compared to what these people pay.
For sure.
But that's nuts to me how good that guitar was for $4,000. I can't imagine that a guitar could be better than that in feel. And it was light as a feather. The neck just melted into my hand. Like, if you've got $4,000 sitting around and you don't care about your money and you want to spend it, go buy a Ronin guitar. They're great. They're really cool looking too. They do a great job making a unique looking instrument. They do these giant custom gold foil pickups on them and stuff.
Oh yeah,
Jimmy. I've played one of the guitars from Ronin that they have pictures of Jimmy Lovino from Conan's band playing.
Cool.
Yeah. Solid instruments over there. I feel like I'm doing an ad for them now.
Whatever.
But like I'm saying,
hey, Ronin Guitars, listen to our podcast.
Send us something.
Send us a Ronin guitar.
Yeah,
we'll give you like a year's worth of ads.
We will keep doing the show until we've earned it.
Yeah, we'll give you a lifetime of ads.
We will come in here 1 hour a week for the rest of our lives to work on these guitars.
All right.